Hello students, so today we will be starting with a new chapter. The new chapter name is the Cold War Era. This is one of the important chapter of the Political Science of Class 12 Part 1 book. So let's start with the chapter. You see, let me give you the overview point regarding the Cold War era. So what do you mean by the Cold War era? The Cold War era started after the World War II. When World War ended in the year 1945, in the year 1960, the Cold War era started. Now what is the reason behind the Cold War era? So let us have a look over that. Now you see, let us first understand about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now what do we understand about the Cuban Missile Crisis? After the Cuban Missile Crisis started, after that only the Cold War came into existence. You see, in April 1961, the leaders of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics were worried that the United States of America would invade communist-ruled Cuba. If I talk about the island Cuba, Cuba is a small island in the Caribbean side of the North America. It is a part of the North American continent. And on the other hand, during that time, in the year 1961, what had happened? There was a big war between the two countries, USSR and United States of America. USSR is also known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which means the Russia, the part of Russia. You see, during that time, Russia and United States of America was the two powerful countries. So during that time, what had happened? The USSR, the Russian people, which means the Russian president, was very much scared that the United States of America would invade communist-ruled Cuba. The Russian wanted to convert Cuba into a military base. They wanted to convert Cuba into a military base. As a result, they were afraid that if United States of America might throw Fidel Castro. You see, during that time, Fidel Castro was the president of Cuba. During that time, Fidel Castro was the president of Cuba. So as a result, what had happened? The Russian people were scared that if United States of America would invade communist-ruled Cuba and would overthrow Fidel Castro. During that time, Cuba was an ally of the Soviet Union. Cuba was an ally of the Soviet Union, which means Cuba used to get direct benefits from the Russia itself, the financial benefits as well, and also the diplomatic and financial aid they used to get from the Soviet Union itself. Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, decided to convert Cuba into a Russian military base. You see, Nikita Khrushchev was the president during the year 1961 of Russia. So as a result, he wanted to convert Cuba into a military base, into a Russian base. As a result, what had happened? He has placed most of the nuclear weapons in Cuba. 3 weeks after the Soviet Union had placed the nuclear weapons in Cuba, the Americans became aware of it. In the year 1962, the Russian president Nikita Khrushchev placed all the nuclear weapons in Cuba in the year 1962. So as a result, what had happened? The United States of America was threatened. The United States of America was threatened, and after 3 weeks, they understood that Cuba became one of the nuclear base for the Russian army, for the Russian people, I mean this. So the US President John F. Kennedy, beware of the situation, ordered American warships to intercept in Soviet Union heading to Cuba as a way of warning the USSR. During that time, the US President was John F. Kennedy. So John F. Kennedy intervened all the Soviet ships. They intervened all the Soviet ships so that they cannot enter the Cuba island. They cannot enter the Cuba island because they have intercepted all the ships. The Americans were determined to get Khrushchev remove the missiles. Now you see, the Americans were determined that Khrushchev would remove all the missiles, all the nuclear weapons from the Cuba itself. Now let me give you a brief introduction afterwards what had happened when the United States were determined regarding the removal of the missiles. As a clash scene, you see, after that what had happened, the clash was imminent. The clash was imminent and the whole world thought that there will be a war between the United States of America and the USSR, which means the Russia. The prospects of this clash made the whole world nervous, for it would have been no ordinary war. Eventually, both the countries decided to avoid war. The Soviet ships slowed down and turned back. You see, both of the countries can go for a war, but they have declined the war. At the end of the day, the United States of America thought that they will not be considering any war, and as a result, the Russian army also backed off. The Soviet ships also turned back, and they never thought of getting into a war. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a high point of what came to be known as the Cold War. The Cold War. Why it is considered to be a Cold War? Why? Because it was not that war in comparison to World War One and World War Two. You see, World War One and World War Two was a massive destruction. But Cold War, if I talk about Cold War was not a massive destruction. And most of the people were not affected in the Cold War, but in World War One and World War Two, most of the common people were being affected. As a result, this war was considered as the Cold War. You see, the Cold War referred to the tensions and the series of confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. Now you see why the Cold War happened. The Cold War happened between United States and the Soviet Union, but at last the war ended. There was no war. There was no confrontations in the war after that. The Cold War, as never escalated as a hot war, has taught the appropriate way of organizing political, economic, and social life all over the world. So from the Cold War, what do you understand? What is the moral of the story that you understand from the Cold War? Is that to engage into a political and organizational warfare, also to maintain peace all over the world. You see, it was an effective way to organize all the political, economic, and social life all over the world. So as a result, what had happened? Most of the people were not affected. You see, this is Cuba. As I told that Cuba is an island. So as a result, during that time, Cuba as became the Russian base or the military base for the Russian people. They thought of attacking these places like Chicago is there, Atlanta is there, New York, Washington is there. But they were unsuccessful and they never went for a war. Here this is John F. Kennedy and here it is Nikita Khrushchev. During that time there was a very hot confrontation between the two presidents. These two presidents used to belong from the most powerful empire during that time. During that time, Russia and United States of America was the most powerful countries after the World War II ended. Now, as we have understand about the Cuba Missile Crisis, now we will be understanding about the Cold War, that what is the actual meaning of Cold War. You see, the end of the World War was the beginning of the Cold War. The World War ended when the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese city of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, letting Japan to surrender. Now you see here what had happened. The Cold War started after the World War II. You see how World War II ended. World War II ended when there was the throwing of nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which means these are the both Japanese cities. After the Japanese cities came into destruction, as a result, the Japan people surrendered in the war. When Japan surrendered in the war, as a result, the World War II ended. But here, no one was the winner considered. The US decision to drop the bombs was considered unnecessary as Japan was about to surrender, but the intention was to stop the Soviet Union from making military and political gains in Asia. You see, why World War II actually started? Just because to stop the Soviet Union. You see, during that time, USSR, the Russia was the most powerful country. As to make Soviet Union surrender, as to make the Soviet Union surrender, during that time the Japan got into the destruction. The nuclear bombs were thrown into Japan so that they can control the Soviet Union. You see, these are all military and political gains during that time. For one country, the other country got affected. US supporters argued that the dropping of the atomic bombs was necessary to end the war quickly and to stop further loss of American and Allied lives. On the other hand, the Second World War was the rise of 2 new powers on the global stage. This is one of the very important things, the United States and the Soviet Union. You see, the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was completely unnecessary as considered by the American supporters. But what had happened after the end of the World War II, the United States of America and USSR became the most powerful of all other countries. They considered to be the two new powers on the global stage. In 1945, the Allied forces. Now the Allied forces. What are the Allied forces that came into the World War II? The US, the Soviet Union, the Britain and the France actually defeated the Axis powers led by Germany, Italy and Japan. Now you see the Allied forces. The Allied forces, the US, the Soviet Union, Britain and France defeated the Axis power, the Germany, Italy and Japan. During that time, Italy and Japan were being defeated by US, the Soviet Union, Britain and France. So as a result, during that time, I hope you have heard about Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler also surrendered, that belongs from Germany, and also Japan surrendered during that time. And this US, Soviet Union, Britain and France, they were actually considered winner, but no one was the winner during that time. They actually defeated this Axis powers. The war had involved almost all the major powers of the world spread out to regions outside Europe, including Southeast Asia, China, Burma, and parts of India's northeast. But you see, for the World War II, most of the common people were also being affected. The other countries like Asia, China, Burma, and parts of northeast India was also being affected during that time. The other countries, if I talk about the three countries, if I could talk about the other countries, the Axis powers and the Allied powers were the main powers. But the other countries who wanted to be the participant in the World War II, they were also being affected during that time. You see, if there is any nuclear war also, no country is considered to be a winner. No country is considered to be a winner, but only the common people are get affected in the destruction. Now you see, the very, very important point, the logic of deterrence. Now, the logic of deterrence is related to the nuclear war. If there is a nuclear war, either one of the countries is considered to be the winner or the other country is considered to be the loser. Now, let me see what had happened. In the event of a nuclear war, both sides will be badly harmed, that it will be impossible to declare one side or the other as the winner. Now, you see, if both the countries comes into a war, no one is considered to be a winner, no one is considered to be defeated, but all the common people are get affected in the war itself. You see, both the sides will be badly harmed. In the war of nuclear or in the nuclear war, both the countries are actually defeated. Even if one of them tries to attack and disable the nuclear weapons of its rival, the other would still be left with enough nuclear weapons to inflict unacceptable destruction. Very, very important. If one country tries to disable the nuclear weapons of the other country, then the other country will also have the nuclear weapons to destruct the other country. You see, no one will be considered winner at the end of the day. You see, if one country is attacking the other country will also try to attack. This is called the logic of deterrence. Very, very important. This is called the logic of deterrence, as both sides have the capacity to retaliate against an attack and to cause so much destruction that neither can afford to initiate war. In the logic of deterrence, you see, this is the law. In the logic of deterrence, both the countries will have the capacity to defeat each other, but at the end of the day, there will be so much destruction that no people will be coming to afford it. There will be so much destructions at the end of the day that neither can afford to initiate war. You see, if there is war, then both the countries are being destructed and both the countries are being affected at the end of the day. Thus, the Cold War, in spite of intense rivalry, remained cold. The deterrence relationship prevents war, but not the rivalry between powers. Now you see, in spite of the Cold War, there is intense rivalry, remain cold. Here, if I talk about the Cold War, the World War I was the massive destruction, the World War II was the massive destruction, but if I talk about the Cold War, there was not much destruction. There was not much destruction because both the leaders declined about the war. During that time, in a particular time, they have declined the war. The deterrence relationship prevents war, but not the rivalry between the powers. Now, the deterrence relationship, if I talk about the deterrence relationship, it prevents war, but not rivalry between powers. Now, here, the war is prevented. The war is actually prevented, but the rivalry between both the superpowers, or you can say both the countries, are still there. The rivalry is still there. So this is the law of deterrence. Let me give you a short note regarding the law of deterrence. The law of deterrence means if both the countries comes into the war, no one is considered to be the winner. One country will be there to control the other country, but the other country will still be there to attack. Which means one country will try to attack if the other country try to disable the nuclear weapons, which means at the end of the day, no one is considered to be the winner. In the law of deterrence, it has the capacity to attack, to retaliate the attack. You see, in the law of deterrence, they have the capacity to retaliate against the attack, but the rivalry between the two countries will not be declined. So, for that reason, the Cold War is considered in that way regarding the law of deterrence. I hope you have understood my class and you have liked my class. If you want to know any of the courses in the Bhadra Academy, then you can contact in this number 86383 91721. Thank you so much for watching my class.